gender norms and framing the opportunities for health. So you've heard all about this great evidence from the 4 papers that we actually had to wait for to write our paper. But it was quite a crush, and we did it, I think. So using evidence largely from the series, we've created an agenda for action in our paper describing 5 categories of recommendations. This is a big agenda, like many agendas, so today we wanted to make this much more digestible by highlighting examples of specific actions for each of these recommendations, so that our agenda for action is transformed right here in this room into an agenda for impact. So the first is to focus on health outcomes rather than the process or output indicators to measure the success of our efforts to address gender equality. To do this, we suggest focusing on specific SDG targets that require attention to gender equality to achieve greater progress. For example, progress on reducing global maternal mortality, target 3.1, can only be accelerated by addressing gender-related factors such as low social and economic status of women, limited access to information and resources, the inability to make independent decisions about one's own healthcare, and of course poor infrastructure such as roads and efficient transport to get women to health facilities. This will of course require the health sector to work with other development sectors. Second, to reform the workplace and workforce, which you heard from paper 4 about, in addition to what our colleagues have presented, we really underscore the need to build a pipeline of health and development professionals who are educated and trained to understand the difference, the very fundamental difference between sex and gender, and address the impact of gender inequality and restrictive gender norms on health systems and outcomes. Third, to fill data gaps, a foundational and pet favorite of mine, high impact action that is essential is to strengthen civil registration and vital statistics, or CRVS systems, with an emphasis on recording and reporting complete data for SDG targets. Given that 6 of the SDG 3 gender-related targets require CRVS data, the health sector could lead the charge with other sectors to ensure that countries prioritize functioning CRVS systems with increased coverage and high-quality gender data. We note that there are several initiatives, excellent initiatives underway to accelerate this change, including the Global Financing Facility, IDRC's CRVS Center for Excellence, and of course Data2X. And we recommend that their efforts are supported and expanded globally. Fourth, to empower civil society organizations, we urge governments to enable spaces for them to organize and mobilize support. We also urge donors to increase flexible and multi-year funding for these groups, as well as increase their reach to the corridors of power in regional and global networks that can support them. The success in addressing gender equality in health so far has largely been because of grassroots efforts of women's organizations and civil society groups on the ground. The recent announcement, actually at this conference, that Canada's Equality Fund will support civil society organizations in this way is an exciting start to this idea. Fifth, to strengthen independent accountability mechanisms, we call for an inclusive web of accountability for different actors to hold each other accountable. Particularly, in this case, we wanted to highlight corporate entities who we don't normally hang out with, but they are powerful agents in shaping gender norms related to health through advertising and media messages, as you saw from Lori's and others' presentations. So how do we in global health hold them accountable for their role in setting gender norms that shape better health outcomes? How do we leverage their business goals to create the change we want? One example is that of UN Women's Initiative called the Unstereotype Alliance, and I believe there's a big booth downstairs in the basement, a collaborative initiative in partnership with corporate entities to promote and hold each other accountable for gender equitable, non-stereotypical marketing messages to improve health. So these are just a few actions for impact to get your head around a rather large agenda. And our paper describes other ways in which the health sector can lead the charge to create a new normal, so you have to read the paper. But why did we identify these actions for impact? And for that, I'm going to turn to none other than Geeta to answer that question.
Thanks, Nandini. So we identified those particular actions that Nandini mentioned to address what we found were 4 persistent barriers to progress. The first of these barriers are the explicit and the implicit myths that have long been held by the global health community, such as, and I'm just going to mention a few, that gender norms are entrenched and cannot be changed, or that gender norms are elusive and cannot be measured. But as the presentations before us just clearly showed, those myths need now to be dispelled. The second is that there are strong institutional barriers to progress, and the one that I want to talk about in particular is gender mainstreaming as the approach that we have used for all these years to address gender inequality. In our paper, we say that gender mainstreaming has not worked. It has not worked to give us the outcomes that we seek, and therefore we ask to move away from the process indicators to measure our success, how many gender focal points, how much money. Let's move away from that, folks, and let's focus instead on whether we've made a dent in the health outcomes that we're seeking by addressing gender. That's what we need now. Third, we talk about giving civil society, as Nandini said, more money and more political space. That's because the space for them is rapidly shrinking. They have limited funding, and yet, as Nandini said, most progress has been achieved because of them. And fourth, that corporate interests that manipulate gender norms for profit have been a huge hurdle that we have to now overcome. For example, to promote alcohol consumption and increase profits, the corporate sector has manipulated and influenced lifestyle choices, which then have significant negative health outcomes. Ultimately, folks, to do all of this, we have to acknowledge that it's all political, because it requires a shift in the economic and political power that underpins gender inequality and maintains harmful gender norms. So, and this is a particularly politically challenging time, as you all know. There's a noticeable backlash by conservative forces against women and gender minorities and against human rights overall. Simultaneously, however, and this is what gives us hope, there is a very visible resistance, thanks to all of us in this room and others, to that backlash. Progressive grassroots social movements fueled by social media and the mobilization of communities are holding people in power to account and are demanding gender equality and women's rights, as well as the rights of gender minorities. We also now have new champions challenging harmful norms of masculinity and engaging men in the fight for gender equality. Harnessing the full force of social media, all of these actors have been able to make their efforts visible. When these organic, local, and global movements are combined with the compelling evidence that was presented to you today on the impact of gender inequality and restrictive gender norms on health outcomes, and in a context in which governments are under severe pressure now to achieve the SDGs, we believe that this is the opportune time to act. The time, folks, is now. Let's get the job done. Thank you.